start with is to ask you where you came from today to attend this year's conference.
From Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas. Still nice and warm down there this time of year?
It's still nice and warm.
Great. Tell me your story. How or why did you get into Agile?
I got into Agile because it made sense to the way I'd already thought about software. So it was, I think for a lot of people in 2000, thereabouts, who picked up Kent Beck's book on extreme programming, probably had an ugly duckling moment where they realized there was a family of people out there scattered around the diaspora that thought just like them. So for me, it was just reading about software development that made sense to me while having day-to-day experiences that always felt like I was out of step with the way everything else was working, the way software development was working.
Okay. And why did you choose the topic you did to speak on at this year's conference?
I've been interested or involved, not involved, interested in doing, let me step back. I started wanting to do test automation in about 1998, I think. And when I got exposed to extreme programming and saw test-driven development and the writings and practices of people who've been doing it a lot longer with a lot more insight, it became a pretty strong focus. I think it was a strong focus for a lot of people in Agile at the time to come up to speed on test-driven development and developer testing. Over the years, we tend to, hopefully, you figure out that that the words of the early explorers about test-driven development, that it's about design, hopefully you connect to what that really means. And I think that for the most part, that still hasn't happened. So teams that are self-identified as Agile, that have lots of testing practices and testing artifacts, are often failing to step back and wonder if they're creating counterproductivity through design. So the topic that I'll speak to in my session will specifically be the relationship of testing to design, and the fact that we've practically fetishized testing in Agile and in general now for developers, to the point that it's almost as ritualistic as waterfall, as the things that we say that it challenges.
Yeah.
So it's become its own tradition, or its own traditional problem. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that.
Cheers.
And one of the themes of this year's conference is hunting Agile elephants.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me an example of an elephant that you found to challenge an organization?
We can just say with developer testing, that's a big one. I mean, there are a lot of organizations that now do developer testing. If we go back to 2000, 2001, there was probably a few, those folks who taught us developer testing, folks who came out of Smalltalk into Java. Kent's work in writing JUnit. That was the early days. People didn't do a lot of it, but now, it's almost thought of as common. And even people who aren't doing it sort of recognize that it's a thing to do. But we've ended up in I think, a general situation in the industry where we have folks and teams writing tests, almost just to write tests, without really putting a lot of thought into what you could learn from tests, other than that you might have introduced a bug. So while we're not talking about productivity and design, specifically in Agile, which is really really pushing the issue of testing for developers. If we push developers into testing and push hard enough, we'll actually create the failures that we think we're trying to solve with testing. So I think that's a pretty good elephant that needs to be hunted and shot. Mostly because we're not yet talking generally about what the point of testing and test-driven development is. And we're not talking about it in a general sense. We're mostly still talking about programmers using test frameworks. And notions of quality are practically absent from the dialogue, or meaningful notions of quality and discussions of quality are still absent from the dialogue. But I think, on the upside, if you look outside of Agile and into lean methodologies, there's a lot more applicable knowledge to help us put testing in context in a much more thoughtful and meaningful way, I think, than what we have just by pushing the agenda of developer testing. But there's a lot of Agile elephants. I think that can be, it's a very crowded room filled with elephants.
Perfect. And can you tell me a success story where you've seen an organization overcome an elephant in the room?
I think maybe it's a little immodest, but I think that the best story I can tell is the one I'm involved with now with my team at Rackspace, where we are somewhat rehabilitating Agile problems with Agile or our use of it. These are pretty common problems, sort of ritualistic Agile. The switch from focusing on straight up, let's say, iteration or time box based or card based or Scrum wall based stuff, and ritualistic Agile to something more thoughtful that's based in principles, is something that I would consider a pretty big win, because it means introducing a heck of a lot of counterintuitive ideas. I think even more counterintuitive than Agile ideas were in 2000. And that changing of minds is, I think, whenever it happens, is a great victory. So I couldn't speak in great detail about what the situation is in my team, but it's very pleasurable to watch people realize that counterintuitive ideas are merely counterintuitive, and then that's the whole point of thinking.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. Cheers.